This is a very provocative comment, so if we don't want to address it completely now, but I'd like to put it on the table as a theme. Something that is striking me as an observation, even an experience. So as I'm listening to all of these varied interpretations of this same text, this strikes me as an experience I have when I'm reading profound poetry. The surplus of meaning that Ricoeur talks about, and you unpack it. But of course, and I mean that. That's what makes it a sacred text in some way, and that's what makes it different from reading the back of your cereal box or something like that. Do people still do that? I don't know. Anyways, right. But of course, Ricoeur also pointed out that brings with it a profound problem, because and then Echo picked up. You have the problem of drift. Like, where does this stop? What's the normativity? How do we find the through? And you can see Plato wrestling with that.
It's the manic problem.
Well, yeah, exactly. But you can see Plato wrestling with that problem of, we have to open this up to multiple perspectives, but we can't let it become unconstrained.
Yep.
And he's trying to find this. And I'm not proposing a problem.
No, but you're right, and the Catholic answer, I think, would be the Church. That's why the Church is needed, because
right.
Exactly right. There is this wonderful plurality of meanings. It's like in Lonergan, the different stages of the epistemic process. At one stage, it's wonderful to be playful, and here's an idea, and that's an idea, and so is this, and well, all these bright ideas can't all be the right idea. At some point, you have to make a judgment. Lonergan says that's the third step in the process. So the Church, I think, would say, finally, a judgment has to be made where maybe here's a range of meanings, or this is the parameter that within which this text operates. Because otherwise it does become vociferous, and then the community can't move anywhere with the text. We're just chattering with each other all the time.
It's also precisely the process by which a story in any form is created. You start with blue sky, right? You set certain conditions that are in place. Stephen King says you write with the door closed, but you edit with the door open. Right, so there's if you have maximum freedom at the beginning, but then you set a narrative contract, and the rules sort of narrow and have to be constrained as you move forward.
Yeah. My suspicions, John, is that as we advance with these large language models, we'll be able to specify the symbolic relationships because they're encoded in the text. Right, and so I mean, I've been thinking that we're on the verge of something like a computational epistemology. I mean, one of the things that both Jonathan and I have encountered continually in our discussions with people like Sam Harris, let's say, is the postmodern critique, which is, well, you're just reading into the text. Right. It's like, well, whenever you listen to someone, whenever you talk, whenever you read any text, you're reading into the text because the meaning is coded at multiple levels. But that doesn't mean it's arbitrary. We know from the large language models, for example, that there are much more robust patterns of coding compared to others, right? You can actually map that even mathematically. And what we'd hope is that what tradition does, I think, over some protracted period of time, is bring to the forefront the most potent actual relationships within the text. Now, it wouldn't only be textual because there's images and there's architecture, there's all sorts of things that go along with tradition. But it's not merely an interpretation. It's also a reflection of the encoding of the meaning within texts. Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories. They change the listener who takes them seriously.
The person that you do not think could ever be virtuous, well, let me show you, this is the person who is fulfilling the law and the prophets.
I don't believe in that promise. I'll just be honest at this point.
Then it hit me. I saw it.
This Jew is very frightened of a post-Christian society.
The power of love.
I don't want to be in a Hallmark card, I tell you.
We've got our work cut out for us, gentlemen. I sure hope we're up to the task.
I don't know where to land on responding. That's an interesting proposal. I'm for some of the reasons I articulated last night. I don't know if the LLMs could actually solve that problem. They could get, I think, syntactic relations, probabilistic relations.
Yes.
But the pragmatic and the semantics, I think, would be still very difficult. But we're not here to do cognitive science. But the proposal I find interesting, and I found what the bishop said very important too. That it sounds to me like but there's, if I could, it sounds like there's the text, and then you do this unpacking, sort of very right hemispheric. Emil Gilchrist would love it here right now. And then you put some normative demands on it.
And
there's the community, but it sounds to me isn't it also the case that there are practices in there too?
Yeah.
And the text has to live with the practices and the liturgy.
And the images.
And the liturgy has to live with the community, right? And all of these things have to be like mutually reinforcing. And I think even in the medieval
They
world,
have to harmonize.
well, you had the church, and then you had the monastery, and you have the university, and they're all doing these various things with each other. And so,
And the optimal way, I would say, I wonder if Jonathan agrees, as the optimal way to read this text is in the liturgy. Now, you can read it, I think, academically, you can read it the way we're doing now, but the optimal way is in the liturgy, because that's where the discipline of the community is most fully on display.
well, that lets me bring up one thing, which is, and I'm not proposing anything, please, but there's a sense in which the liturgy brings out all the non-propositional meanings and values of the text. It brings out the cultivation of skills and virtue, the enabling of states of consciousness, the transformation of identity and character. And that's not going to be carried in just a propositional reflection on the text.
There are propositional parameters to that.
Oh, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that.
Right.
I'm not denying that. But that's what I was. That's why I wanted to.
That's part of that binding.
Well, yeah, the religio, the binding, and the binding.
Yeah, and there's a powerful, like in the liturgy, there's also a powerful notion of celebration, where we celebrate the life of Christ and the life of the Virgin during the liturgical year, and we have feasts. And the readings, not all of them, but the more important readings will actually then fit into this celebratory cycle where we're remembering, participating, their liturgical acts that bring us to Pentecost or to Ascension, to the different feasts in the life, and the text will have been chosen, through hundreds of years to fit and to make it part of your life. So it's not just like an abstract.
Right.
And
Well,
in
you're
answer to my
supposed to
previous-
come to the text. You're supposed to come to the text as a sinner, so someone full of flaws, who's aiming up and trying to make things better. And then that's also going to be another form of constraint, right? An aim-related constraint. I think one of the things that made me different as an academic from perhaps someone like Richard Dawkins or Harris for that matter, is that I came to this text thinking that I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? I didn't have an a priori presumption of my superiority in any manner to the text. Now, that doesn't mean I had any real attitude towards it, except, what in the world is this? And perhaps there's something I can learn from it. And it is necessary to constrain the range of interpretations of anything that you encounter. Your aim is, in some ways, the primary manner in which you undertake that constraint. So why are you doing this? What do you care about? You mentioned that the other day.
Yeah. Well, I want to reply to that, and I agree with that, but I want to pick up on what the bishop said. One of the problems, I think, in our culture is we tend to have a monological approach. And I'll just put on my cognitive scientist hat for a second here. There's now increasing evidence that human reasoning, interpretation, reflection works much better dialogically than it does individually. You take a standard task, the Waitian selection task, only 10% of people get it right. You replace one person with 4 people who will talk dialogically to each other, and the success rate goes reliably up to 80 or 82%. Like this is, and the church, I take it, is the homing of the practices and this kind of dialogical reflection.
Butterfly cocoon, if you want, is coming up out of this Jewish practice of reading the text in this
Yes.
dialogical way.
Yeah.
We would say, but we're dialoguing too across the ages, as Jews do as well. I mean, I'm dialoguing with Aquinas,
Of course.
with Augustine, and with everybody else.
But
So
John-
you're quite right.
But John, you mentioned yesterday that you practice Lectio Divina, and there's a kind of rich Christian tradition of seeing, it's kind of biblically warranted that the sacred text, part of what makes the Bible a sacred text is that it's a living word, it's God breathed, theopneustos, it's sort of breathed through with the divine spirit. And so there's like that licenses and a certain kind of hermeneutical interpretative anarchy almost. I mean, one of the most famous conversions in the history of the church is St. Augustine, which he describes famously in the Confessions, and he hears a boy over the wall saying, tolle lege, take up and read. And he takes up the New Testament, he takes up the Bible, it falls open a passage from Romans, and then he's not giving it a wild interpretation, but that passage suddenly strikes him in the most explosive way, and it's transformative. And I mean, that's a tradition maybe Protestants have stressed more since the Reformation, but I know it's within the Catholic and Orthodox traditions too. And that's maybe what sets it apart from other texts like Moby Dick or Shakespeare or Dickens that have got a similar sort of richness.